Hello, good evening. I'm Yoav Limor, and this is a special edition of Strictly Security coming to you live from the Jaffa port. Day 68 of the war in Gaza. Fighting inside Gaza is intensifying and at a heavy cost, with 10 Israeli soldiers killed on Tuesday. 9 of them in an ambush at the heart of Sejaia, in one of the deadliest single encounters in the ground operation so far, bringing the number of combat deaths to 115 so far. Among the killed were several senior army officers. Rifts between the United States and Israel went public this week as U.S. President Joe Biden warned that Israel was losing international support for its campaign against Hamas, and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly rejected American plans for post-war Gaza. Images of mass surrender by Hamas militants in Gaza dominated news cycles around the world this week. We'll speak about the value of real-time intelligence obtained from the surrendering fighters and passed directly to IDF forces on the ground. And the incredible story of one man who was able to escape Hamas terrorist moments before being taken to Gaza wearing only his underwear. All of that and much more over the next hour and a half. Let's begin. Let's turn to the north of Israel and to our correspondent, Zach Under. Zach, please bring us the latest on that front.
It was somewhat of a quiet day on the Israeli side with 1 or 2 attacks, potentially. One of the attacks in Kiryat Shimona did not trigger a red alert or an alarm, but we did hear the outgoing artillery, and there were apparently some rockets fired. In the western communities near the coast, north of Haifa, there was an attack that issued a red alert, one of the only of the day here in the northern border. But in southern Lebanon, there appeared to be more damage. The Israeli strikes retaliating in these positions could be seen from Haifa as the smoke billowed across the border. It appears that the IDF was targeting some Hezbollah cells that were operating very near to the border, and Hezbollah later in the afternoon, later this evening, announced that several fighters were killed in these IDF strikes. Hezbollah has said since October 7th that over 100 Hezbollah fighters have been killed in this war, these exchanges that continue to happen on the northern border. But the biggest headline of the last 24 hours was last night's strikes from Syria, 2 of them falling inside Syrian territory, with the third apparently a rocket falling in an open area in Israel. The IDF says it was retaliating against those points of origin from where Syria was firing from, and that they belonged to the Syrian army.
Yes, Zach, a word about the civil front. Do you see civilians coming back, or most of them are still away?
Well, we still see thousands evacuated. These towns are a lot quieter than they normally are, although there are signs of life. Some of the grocery stores are still open, some of the smaller shops coming back to life, because the economic impact here is tremendous. The real sense of danger, though, comes if you're in a place like Kiryat Shimona and you're walking out of the grocery store and you see the mortar fire that's in the hill above. There's just a mile away or so, and it's a little bit of an unsettling sight, especially to see the contrast of the everyday life that's taking place still, or the attempts to keep that everyday life continuing, and then to see the amount of activity that's happening in southern Lebanon. We've been able to put together that some of these strikes that Hezbollah has been initiating with the ATGMs, these anti-tank guided missiles, and with the mortar fire, it does require personnel on the ground. So several Hezbollah members will travel as south as they possibly can and then attempt to fire on these positions with their personnel manning these pieces of equipment. So it does require almost a line of sight or some directional ability to see at where they're targeting. And oftentimes it's been these IDF outposts, but sometimes it's also these northern communities. The personnel will fire. They have minutes to set up and then just minutes to try and leave and escape the IDF retaliatory strikes, which the Israelis have the advantage here. They have the Air Force with the jets and the drones that is being able to target these positions.
Zach, thanks so much. Keep safe. Now from the northern part of Israel to the southern part, the main front in Gaza, and our correspondent Jonathan Regev is over there. Jonathan, give us the latest, please.
Yes, obviously a difficult day for the army in Gaza. It was last night when this very difficult incident happening in the neighborhood of Sajaiya in the eastern part of the Gaza Strip. With many casualties, many victims for the Israeli army. This was one of the main concerns for Israel going into this ground operation, the understanding that once in Gaza, it is Hamas that has the home court advantage, let's call it this way. They know the narrow streets, they know the alleyways, they know everything over there, and there are many traps that they have prepared for the army, and this was one of them. There was a lot of criticism on the Israeli army about the fact that it took a long time for the ground operation to actually begin. And once it began, there was criticism that the progress is slow. This is exactly the reason. There's an understanding that Hamas is waiting and prepared many traps in this densely populated area, and those traps could appear everywhere. There's now a debate whether it is better perhaps to bomb these kind of places from the air, or perhaps try and send in soldiers to clear the area, as happened last night. Why not bomb from the air, say many, and not expose the soldiers to danger? That is one thought. The other thought says that if you send your soldiers in, you can get very precious intelligence. You can actually capture Hamas terrorists and not just kill them, but capture them and get even more intelligence. And if you want to clean the place altogether, you cannot do it from the air. Eventually, there's no replacement, nothing better than boots on the ground. But of course, it comes with danger, and it comes with a price.
Yes, Jonathan, one more question regarding the hostages kept in Gaza. Anything new about them?
There's one note, one hostage was pronounced dead. The army contacting the family of one of the hostages from the community of Nir Yitzhak on the southern part of the Gaza border, telling them that there's enough intelligence to pronounce him as a murderer whose body is kept in Gaza. But as far as rescue missions, there's nothing new yet, apart from that a message that yet another one of those hostages has now been proclaimed dead.
Yes, Jonathan Regev, thank you so much for this report. And from our front to international front, and as IDF forces keep making progress on the ground, U.S. President Joe Biden and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu clashed over who should govern Gaza after the war, in a remarkable public display of differences emerging between the two leaders over the conflict. Our U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim joins us now from New York. Mike, we hear the words coming out from Washington, D.C. Do you think that we will practically hear President Biden say the frightening words looking from Israel, ceasefire?
No, I don't think it's coming anytime soon. I don't think it's coming at all in terms of a ceasefire. We will get hints, sometimes strong hints from the White House, sometimes possible manipulations. However, the term ceasefire, I don't think is going to come from this White House. What they will do is use every bit of leverage that they have to to bend Netanyahu, to bend the IDF toward, what they want to see, what their interests are in this particular case, and what they feel will allow them to keep essentially pushing for international support, even as President Biden acknowledges that it's slipping away as time goes along here. But I think the U.S. is in too deep at this point to call for a ceasefire, and it doesn't seem to really be within their post-Gaza, or rather a post-Hamas Gaza interest either, to call for a ceasefire at this point. There's going to be lots of disagreements. There always are, but I don't think the White House is going to step over that line.
So we're going to see Jake Sullivan coming in Israel, I think, tomorrow. What is he about to tell the Israeli Prime Minister, the Israeli Minister of Defense?
I think there'll be a few messages that he's going to pass along from the White House. Number one, this is in no particular order, by the way, the Kerem Shalom, the crossing there, has to be opened up, not just for inspections as it has been this week, but it needs to be opened up for the transport of humanitarian aid. The United States just says that the flow of humanitarian aid solely through the Rafah crossing along the Egypt-Gaza border is not enough to sustain life-saving measures at this point. So that'll be near or at the top of the list. I think Sullivan really is trying to gain, more than anything, clarity. The messages coming from the Israeli government, the IDF, there's been a whole lot of no's as to what they're not going to do. There haven't been a whole lot of yeses. There hasn't been a whole lot of vision articulated as to the longer-term strategy going forward, especially, and the U.S. keeps, it's almost like an obsession at this point about what the day after is going to look like, the day after Hamas finally loses control over Gaza. What does that look like? Where does it go from there? And the messages that they've been getting from Jerusalem are not to their satisfaction right now, because we hear Prime Minister Netanyahu say, well, the PA cannot run it. Well, this organization cannot. There are a whole lot of no's, and that can very well be justified. But the United States is saying, okay, well, no. What is your plan? What is your vision here? Is it a temporary occupation of Gaza? Is it a longer term? Do you feel comfortable turning it over to this entity, that entity? There's just not a whole lot of clarity right now. And I think more than anything, that's what Sullivan is seeking, so he can go back to Washington and they can continue to make the case to the international community that there is a plan, that there is a strategy, that there is a goal in place here, and it's not just, as Joe Biden said yesterday, quote unquote, indiscriminate bombing.
And is there any plan within the White House for getting the hostages released?
You know, the Biden met today, President Biden met today with 13 family members representing 8 different hostages. The family members that spoke afterward to reporters did not pass along, and this was probably with prior agreement, did not pass along any details of that meeting specifically. They talked about the tone of the meeting. They talked about the warmth of the president and how he's taking a personal interest and sees these family members and their hostages being held as humans and not just, as numbers to, whittle down as time goes along. So I think from that standpoint, there was some connection made there. In terms of strategy, though, Bill Burns, the CIA director, continues to try to push Qatar toward, some sort of a move here vis-a-vis Hamas. But the fact of the matter is right now, until there is some foundation for an agreement between Israel and Hamas, I don't think any outside entity can really push those parties forward here.
Mike, in New York, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And now for further discussion, I'd like to introduce our guest for this hour, former Israeli Consul General in Los Angeles, Yaki Dayan, here with me in the studio, and Professor Chuck Freilich, senior researcher at INSS with over 20 years of experience working in Israel's national security establishment. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us. Yaki, I'll start with you. We're seeing the flames getting higher between Jerusalem and Washington. It's not good for both sides. What should be done, can be done to to lower those flames?
So, as you mentioned, National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan is coming tomorrow to Israel, and he has a long list of items on the agenda. Hostages, war in Gaza, Lebanon, Houthis, many items, and there are a lot of differences here. And Israel has to manage correctly their discussion with Washington in order to create more leverages and to create much more time in order to continue the war in Gaza. So when we speak about time in Gaza, definitely the Americans want to see more humanitarian aid coming into Gaza. They want to see a different kind of war in the southern part of Gaza than in the northern part of Gaza, less bombing from the air. And what they want to hear really is the day after. What Israel is planning for the day after. They want to hear the vision, as your correspondent mentioned correctly, not only the no's, but also the yes. What Israel is saying, how Israel is planning, and definitely he wants to hear the timetable that Israel is planning, especially for the intense phase that is happening now, meaning Khan Yunis and entering the and finishing the Khan Yunis and what's going on afterwards, because the United States doesn't want to enter publicly into a disagreement, into a clash with Israel on those issues. They understand that eventually Israel will continue till the end of the intense phase. So they want to reach discrete agreements. But as Blinken, as Secretary of State Blinken mentioned when he was in Israel, it's a matter of weeks and not months.
Chuck Freilich, in New York, probably it seems different from the other side of the Atlantic, but in Israel, some people are very much concerned when it comes to, arguments between Jerusalem and Washington. Some might be very happy because it shows, that the Prime Minister has courage, standing firmly against the U.S. President.
Well, I don't think anyone should be happy. Our relationship with the United States is a critical factor, a critical component in Israel's national security strategy. Always has been, at least for the last half century, and it will be for a long time to come. We cannot allow ourselves to be in a situation of significant friction with the United States, especially in a situation in which I must say President Biden's response has been phenomenal. We really could not have asked more of an American president to date. It's been very strong military support, strong diplomatic support, including veto in the Security Council, political support, and a huge arms package, which has not yet been approved, but I imagine will be soon. So we have a president who defines himself as a Zionist and really is a lifelong friend of Israel's. And the position that he's taken could not have been better. Well, now it seems to me, and I've felt this way for about the last month, that the Prime Minister, as part of his effort to save his political future, is resorting to a tactic that he's used many times before and successfully, which is to create some sort of straw man adversary. No, it's not really an adversary, but to build something up to make it look like an adversary. And in this case, that's the U.S. and President Biden specifically. And I think what he's beginning to do already is to position himself. I mean, he's the good guy fighting Israel's battle against American pressure. Well, there is, of course, some pressure that we have to stand up to, or it's legitimate for Israel to do so. But it's very limited. Basically, what we have to do is adapt Israeli policy to, in the end, what Washington needs as well. Because without American support, we'd been in very difficult circumstances today, even more. The deployment of 2 U.S. aircraft carrier groups is probably what has deterred Hezbollah and Iran from expanding this war even more.
But Chuck, you're saying correctly that that the American deterrence works against our enemies, mainly Iran and Hezbollah. The famous "don't" that President Biden said about a month and a half ago, or a bit more. But currently in Israel, the common thinking within the administration is that "don't" was not only aimed at Tehran and Beirut, but at Jerusalem as well, telling us Israelis, don't attack.
Well, don't attack what? Don't expand the war.
Don't attack Hezbollah. Don't expand the war to the northern front as well.
Correct. And there's a very serious debate going on in Israel, a substantive debate, whether, since the war has already begun, we're fully mobilized. The U.S. has deployed the aircraft carriers. And since we can no longer tolerate the kind of situation that we had on the northern border, given the experience in Gaza, then maybe this is the appropriate time to take on Hezbollah as well. And other people, of course, are saying, well, that's too much for the traffic to bear. A one-front war is more than enough. I think the American position here is very clear. It, of course, doesn't determine our policy, but it has to be a significant consideration.
Yes.
And I think at the moment, what the administration is doing, and we see this with Biden's statement yesterday, and a whole series of statements from the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, the Vice President, that they're setting limits in time. Nobody has set a firm date yet, but they're telling us that we have weeks, not more. And the more that we shape our tactics in a way that serves American interests, in other words, minimizing casualties, increasing humanitarian aid, that will allow the U.S. to give us a little bit more time.
Yes, Yaki Dayan, so I want to follow up on Chuck Freilich's recent remarks. Two questions. A, when he says weeks, or they say weeks, weeks is 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 50 weeks, what do we mean? And how do we finish the unfinished business in the north if we have to go via Washington to reach Beirut?
Yeah, so I'll start with the north because this is a very significant question. I think that the discussion tomorrow with Jack Sullivan would be, if you are not going to remove Radwan forces and Hezbollah forces from the fence at least 4 or 5 miles, then the only option that Israel has is to start a war, which definitely not in an election year. The United States doesn't want to see that. So they are intensifying their diplomatic efforts together with the French. They are doing their utmost to come with some kind of an idea, some kind of a solution in order to make sure that there is a buffer zone created in the north, because Israel is serious. They understand that Israel understands that it cannot go back to the status quo that existed on October 6th. And then we have more than 100,000 refugees from the north. They want to go back to their homes. So the only option, other option to diplomatic efforts headed by the United States is a larger scale of war up in the north.
But a follow-up on that, a quick one, Yaki. Why should we believe an international solution? We've seen this 1701 resolution from 2006 ending the Second Lebanon War. At the time, there were two no's, a no to an embargo on weaponry to Hezbollah, and a no to an army deployment south to the Litani River. Both were just, dispensed by Hezbollah. They do whatever they want. Why should we believe?
You're 100% right. I mean, mentioning the 1701, that was not the resolution, that was never fulfilled. The assurances will have to come from the Americans. Not, I heard about all kinds of ideas of a larger UNIFIL force that will keep the Radwan forces away from the fence. Those kinds of suggestions cannot work. Only strong American assurances can make the Israelis understand that this is an option. But otherwise, we are headed for another large-scale war up in the north.
And the question regarding the south, weeks means what?
Weeks means that tomorrow the IDF and the chief of the IDF will present his plans for the next phase, for the intense phase, explaining the Americans exactly how much time is needed to complete this mission, which includes definitely the northern part of Gaza, but also Khan Yunis, releasing the hostages, and what will be considered as eradicating at least the infrastructure, the military and administrative infrastructure of the Hamas. So that would give also a timetable. I would say that at least till the end of January.
So what I hear, but it's my ears, so I'm responsible only for them, 10th of January, by the beginning of the new year, after all the people come back to work, in Europe and the U.S. That's what I hear. That's what they're saying about the intensified side. Then we'll go in and out again.
I doubt it, Yoav, because as long as we are not at least achieving few of the goals, even politically, it would be impossible for the Prime Minister to stop on January 10th.
Chuck Freilich, your thoughts regarding that? Those dates, weeks, what would Washington say if Israel comes with 31st of January?
Well, I think you're right. The preference is for something like January 10th when everyone comes back from the New Year break. But if Israel ends up needing another week or two or even 3, I don't think that that's what will be critical. The administration wants to see an end game in Gaza. They don't see it. They are, I think, increasingly doubtful and justifiably whether we really can achieve our military objectives, whether we can destroy Hamas as a coherent military force. I don't like the term destroying and eradicating and whatever, because it's unlikely we can achieve that. It's even becoming questionable whether we can destroy them as a coherent military force and topple them as the governing body. So what do we want? We don't want the PA. Who do we want? As has already been mentioned, Israel's got lots of no's, but no yeses. And there's growing frustration with the Prime Minister, even some suspicion that he may wish to prolong the fighting for political reasons, that the escalation, if it happens in the north, could also be politically motivated. And I think the administration is very, very much against that. So we may be heading to something of I don't want to say a crisis in relations, but significant tension in another few weeks.
Can I offer you another date?
Yeah.
Which is before the State of the Union, which is the beginning of February. That would be the date that the president would aim for.
So you still speak about the end of January. Yes. We speak about the beginning of January, something in between. I believe that after tomorrow, we'll know more after Jack Sullivan's visit to Israel. He's meeting with the Prime Minister of Defense, with the cabinet. He's about to sit their meeting tonight to prepare for that meeting and to take decisions. I believe we'll know much more tomorrow. Chuck Freilich in New York, Yaki Dan here with me in the studio. Thank you so much for making the time and speaking to us this evening. We go for a quick break of commercials, and when we return, we'll keep on our extended coverage of the war in Gaza with an eye open to all other fronts. Stay with us.